order. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 27.
Welcome to the 27th meeting of the Fisheries Committee.
Ceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and express gratitude that we're doing the important work of this committee on lands they've stewarded since time immemorial. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, the committee is meeting to continue its study of Atlantic mackerel and Atlantic herring fisheries. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule.
Today's meeting is in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members can participate in person or over Zoom.
Before we continue, I would like to ask all our in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, but particularly the interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. Pursuant to our routine motions, I would like to advise committee members that all witnesses appearing virtually today have successfully conducted the required technical testing. And just to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those that are participating by video conference, please click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Et en ce qui concerne
Regarding interpretation, for those on Zoom, you can choose at the bottom of your screen between the floor, English or French. And for those who are in the room, you can use the earpiece and choose the channel you want to listen to.
dans la salle.
For members in the room, if you want to speak, please raise your hand. And for those over Zoom, please click the raise hand function. We'll do our best to see you and to give you the floor in the right order.
Have appearing in person, Lucas Desroches, commercial mackerel fisherman. We have participé par vidéoconférence.
Over video conference, we have Professor Dominique Robert from the Université du Québec à Rimouski.
In person, we have from the Prince County Fishermen's Association, Mark Arsenault, the president, and Nigel Buat, the vice president. So with that, we're going to go into our opening statements for 5 minutes or less, starting with Lucas Desroches.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Lucas Desroches. I'm a lobster, tuna, herring, halibut, and mackerel fisherman for Prince Edward Island. I'd like to thank you for giving me the time to speak on some issues in the mackerel industry from a fisherman's standpoint. As fishermen spending time on the water, fishing multiple species, when I say we, I'm speaking myself and other fishers all over the island, we can't help but notice and document the increased schooling mackerel compared to previous years, and we believe the stock is showing signs of recovery. Even if this trend has not yet been fully reflected in the science, due to multiple factors which I believe are giving negative data. One would be the timing of these studies. As an example, with our egg surveys, I think it should be done maybe a little earlier and a little later than it normally is done, just to ensure we're getting the data when the eggs are actually there. Another factor would be the fishing methods. Whenever we use drift nets in Prince Edward Island for mackerel, the common practice is about 32 nets, which is 500 fathoms. The reason we use that amount is so that your boat will drift with the nets properly to keep everything strung out to maximize your chance of catching mackerel. Whereas when the DFO instructed us to do samples, we only used 5 nets, and the wind played much more influence than the tide, making it not effective in catching mackerel at all. And we believe that fixing just minor issues like that could yield a lot better results in our sampling. We voiced these concerns many times with DFO, however, these were ignored. And another example is using handline method. Generally, we use a large weight with 36 hooks, and we lower it as far down into the school of mackerel. And it seems that the larger mackerel tend to be toward the bottom, but whenever we did science with DFO, we only used 6 hooks and a very small weight, which left the hooks on top of the school of mackerel, and on top of the school of mackerel seemed to generally be smaller mackerel. So we believe it gave a poor accuracy to representing the actual stock. We think there should be more. I think there should be more communication with industry when it comes to every discussion associated with mackerel. I've attended AMAC meetings, and it's very obvious that there's a disconnect from DFO science and fishermen. Fishing mackerel for lobster bait is a very important part of fishing operations in PEI. Traditionally, we have relied more on catching our own bait versus having to purchase it from someone else who caught it from the same schools that we've had to watch swim by since it's a migratory species. And then they sell it back to us at prices that have been drastically inflated in recent years. However, access to the bait fishery is very important when it comes to business planning and cost stability. Therefore, I believe moving forward should be a bait-first approach. In this bait-first approach, I feel halibut should also have some of the total allowable catch allocated to make the operation a bit more efficient for fishermen. And if a commercial fishery should be opened, I think attention should be placed on individual quota, limiting large operations from repeating the harm that they potentially have already caused to our industry, and or creating a monopoly which will only increase prices for fishermen. My understanding as of lately is that U.S. science have determined it's safe to remove approximately 10,000 tons of mackerel this year, with anticipation of us Canadians fishing some, which will be subtracted from the total, and the remainder will be fished by them. So 10,000 tons approximately will be fished whether or not we participate in the fishery. I think it would be a great chance to take our share of approximately 4,000 tons and have measures in place to collect the best science possible while fishing to obtain the most accurate representation of the stock, with the ability to catch our own bait, cutting costs of operations for individual fishermen with bait licenses. And that's pretty much all I have. It's just like off the notes. I just want to mention, like, we're seeing a lot more mackerel schooling. We're seeing a lot more out there, and we have lots of fishermen, but lots of them are seeing the mackerel schooling in multiple different areas simultaneously, and we just feel that the science is not reflecting that. So if we can work together a little better to get a more accurate representation of what's actually in the stock, it'll be beneficial for the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next, prochainement, nous allons maintenant.
Next, we will go to Professor Robert for 5 minutes, please. Thank you very much. And thank you to the members of this committee for inviting me. I'm a professor and Canada Research Chair in Fisheries Ecology at the Université du Québec in Rimouski. For more than 20 years, my research has focused on understanding the factors responsible for recruitment variability in marine fish. And in this regard, much of my research has focused on the ecology of fish during the first year of life, a period when mortality is high and variable. Over the years, my work has focused on several fish stocks in Atlantic Canada, including mackerel and southern Gulf St. Lawrence herring. Contrary to a number of forage species stocks in Canada, the assessment of mackerel and southern Gulf herring stocks is based on reliable surveys, and these stocks can therefore be considered data-rich. In the case of mackerel, adult abundance is derived from egg abundance measured annually in the spawning area. For herring, abundance is primarily derived from an annual acoustic survey. Because mackerel is a highly migratory species, it's essential to periodically verify whether a substantial proportion of spawning occurs outside the area covered by the egg survey. In recent years, the survey has been extended on an ad hoc basis to a number of adjacent areas, but a recently published synthesis has shown that the amount of spawning outside the Gulf can be considered negligible in calculating the abundance index. Unfortunately, despite strong restrictions on the commercial fishing of mackerel and southern Gulf spring herring over the past several years, the state of these stocks remains in the critical zone, with biomass at approximately 30% of the limit referenced both for mackerel and spring herring. The critical state of these stocks is the result of high mortality among both adults and juveniles. The high adult mortality rate is explained in part by the current high number of predators in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence, The main predators are gray seals, gannets, and bluefin tuna, species whose populations have increased compared with past decades. In addition to high mortality in adults, the low productivity of these stocks is also due to a decline in the survival rate of juveniles. This decline in recruitment has been traced to environmental conditions that have become unfavorable for larvae and juveniles. The rapid warming of the southern Gulf has notably altered the development period of key zooplankton prey, which now develop earlier in the season, while the spawning period has not changed. Finally, mackerel is a unique case because it's a transboundary stock, and the commercial fishery operating in the United States catches part of the Canadian contingent during its overwintering period. Following its most recent stock assessment, NOAA Fisheries concluded that the U.S. contingent was no longer overfished and decided to triple the total allowable catch from 3,200 to 10,714 tons for this year. Recent studies using both otolith competition and genetic markers to distinguish Canadian and U.S. contingents suggest that between 20 and 80% of U.S. landings consist of fish from the Canadian contingent, depending on the year. However, the methodologies developed to date carry a high level of uncertainty. Even so, considering that only 10 to 20% of U.S. landings consist of fish from the Canadian contingent, the substantial increase in the U.S. TAC could still undermine Fisheries and Oceans Canada's recovery plan. Based on all of these considerations, I'd like to make the following recommendations. Keep fishing activities as low as possible until signs of recovery are observed in mackerel and southern Gulf spring herring stocks. Continue research aimed at accurately identifying the proportion of Canadian contingent mackerel in the U.S. fishery, which I believe is one of the greatest sources of uncertainty. And lastly, establish a joint stock assessment and management strategy with the U.S. to ensure that the state of both contingents is taken into account in all management decisions. Thank you. Thank you very much. With that,
5 minutes or less for opening remarks, please.
First of all, we want to say thank you to the committee for the invitation to speak here about issues that are very important to us and to the members we represent. It's an honour to be here where so much of Canada's history was and continues to be made. My name is Mark Arsenault. I'm the president of Area 25 Lobster Fishery on the Prince Edward Island side of the zone. With me today here is Nigel Beat. He is the Vice President. Our fishery is somewhat unique as we are the only lobster fishery on the Canadian East Coast operating in late summer and early fall, with our season running from mid-August to mid-October. We have approximately 220 members in our local, and when New Brunswick fleet is included, we have about 600 fishers operating in LFA 25. We are here today to share our perspective from the water. We are not scientists or economists, but we spend a great deal of time at sea, and observation is an important part of understanding what is happening in our fisheries. When I'm fishing lobster, I travel as far as 40 nautical miles each way each day. Nigel is similar. Over the past few years, we have observed a noticeable increase in both the number and the size of mackerel schools. On calm days, they seem to be endless. Even when mackerel are not visible at the surface, we can still tell they're there. Our electronic equipment shows them clearly, and seabirds, especially gannets and seagulls, are another strong indicator of fish. When gannets are diving, it usually means there are fish below, typically mackerel or herring. It is also important to note that the areas we travel during our lobster season are not normally the areas where mackerel fishing occurs that time of the year. In late summer and early fall, mackerel tend to gather around herring spawn areas, which is where fishers who target mackerel usually operate. Turning to the economics of it, we all know that there are only two ways to improve the bottom line in any business: increase your revenue, reduce your costs. We have fishers who have bait bills in excess of $50,000 for a 2-month fishery. That is a significant number particularly when we are seeing large amounts of potential bait in the water just under our feet. In small coastal communities where fishers struggle financially, the effects ripple through the entire community. When our incomes drop, we spend less at local businesses and contribute less to the community. The impact is felt by everyone. Another issue we'd like to raise is stock sharing with the USA. From a fisher's perspective, it is difficult to understand why American fleets will be able to harvest fish from the northern stock while Canadian fishers have no access. The USA has reportedly requested a total TAC of more than 10,000 tons for 2026, and it is possible that a large portion of that could be coming from the northern stock. For fishers in Atlantic Canada, that raises an obvious question. Why are we in Canada unable to access a resource that is available just to lose much of that resource to the Americans? Finally, we'd like to speak a little bit about spring herring. There has been a request submitted to open a small herring fishery in our area, and our observations suggest the herring stock has increased significantly. I am on the water throughout the spring, lobster fishing as a helper, as is Nigel. Along the same shorelines where we fish lobster, we regularly see large numbers of diving gannets, which seems to increase every year for the last number of years, which usually indicates schools of herring gathering to spawn. The economic benefit of allowing limited access to this resource would be similar to what we described with mackerel, a reduction in bait costs, of course. We sincerely hope that this committee and the Honourable Minister will give serious consideration to these concerns. With rising fuel costs and increases in operating expenses, access to a sustainable bait fishery would make a meaningful difference for many fishers, their families, and the communities that depend on them. We are simply asking for the opportunity to fish sustainably for the resources we see almost daily. No one has a bigger interest in protecting the fishery than those whose livelihoods depend on it. In closing, I would like again to thank the committee for the invitation to speak here today. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arsenault. With that, we're going to begin our first round of questions, starting with Mr. Small for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is going to be to Mr. Arsenault. Mr. Arsenault, looking forward to the 2026 season with the projections that we're looking at for fuel prices and uncertainty with U.S. market, what impact would it be to your enterprise if you were able to catch all of your bait yourself versus buying it?
As I've stated, a lot of guys are in the $50,000 range. I'm not very far off from that. So the catch total would be a bit unrealistic, I suppose, but we could easily cut our bait bill in half. Easily.
So in our last mackerel report that was published in the winter of 2023, there was a recommendation there for Canada to match a quota equivalent to what the U.S. is catching. So over the last couple of years, Canada's caught 440 metric tons of mackerel for bait, and in the same time, the United States has harvested 15,000 metric tons. What do you think of that?
It's not good what I think about that. As fall fishers, we didn't get a crack at the bait fishery at all, because the first part was gone long before we started. The second part only started after we started the lobster fishery, and it was the first part of the lobster fishery when we were really busy with the lobsters, so we didn't have time. Most people didn't land the mackerel in the fall fishery. So for us, it's totally inaccurate. It's just no good.
Do you have any thoughts on why the spring opening lasts for several weeks and the late summer, early fall opening for bait fishery goes in like less than 48 hours? Do you have any thoughts to share on that, why that's happening that way?
In the spring, most of the boats are fishing lobster. Some of them participate just maybe to get a couple of pans, which is 250, 300 pounds, maybe. Some don't participate at all. But whenever the lobster gear came ashore in late June, and when it opened again, then there were a lot of boats had nothing else to do, so they just get their quota every day, right?
It wasn't
didn't
for
last very long.
Wasn't for a lack of mackerel during that spring opening.
No.
So, how the sightings have been strong? Yeah. How would you compare it to what you would have seen when you were a boy, when mackerel were super plentiful? What you're seeing on the water now?
In the number of schools, probably more. Not saying there's more fish because you can't see the depth of it all the time, but like I said, I'm sailing close to 40 miles some days, or maybe over 40 miles some days. When you go home in the daylight and the waters are calm, it's one after the other, after the other, after the other. Not every day. I'm not here to tell you lies, but in some cases it's just crazy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. Now to Mr. DeRoche. We had DFO's Director of Science here on Monday, and he talked about the sightings of mackerel on top of the water, and he basically said that plentiful sightings of mackerel on top of the water is not a true indicator of a plentiful resource. Now, you've fished mackerel all your life. If you were looking for an indicator of mackerel, what would you be looking for?
As Mark previously mentioned, historically when people were going after mackerel, you would find schooling herring, and that's where the bulk of them would be. But, I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire, and if there's tons of mackerel showing up on top of the water, there's tons of mackerel there. And it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell exactly what's going to be in a school, but you got to go into it and fish it and to see the quality of it, to see the size of the mackerel in it, and to see what's in it. But I can tell you at times when I fish bluefin tuna that there's no herring around schooling. We actually have radars in our boat that we can set up to pick up gannets diving and birds diving, and we'll follow to where those birds are, and you'll always find a school of something, and sometimes those schools are quite significant as well. So the biggest indicators is visibly seeing the mackerel, knowing from herring fishermen that there's herring spawning, there'll be mackerel around, or just sailing around, following your radar and finding the birds because they're diving for something.
Now, we've only got a few seconds here now, but Mr. DeRoche, you were at the AMAC meetings this year, correct? And
There in person, no.
But okay, so you know who was there.
Yeah.
How many NGOs attended the AMAC meeting this year?
I couldn't give you an exact number, but I know that there was more than last year, and there seems to be more every year, which is troubling because.
Tell me about the influence that the ENGOs have compared to the input that harvesters with their on-the-water experience, which the Prime Minister said he was going to listen to when he campaigned in April. How's that going?
So I'm afraid, Mr. Small, we are over time, and sorry, Mr. DeRoche, if you'd like to provide a further answer in writing, the committee would appreciate that. But at this point, I'm afraid we are going to have to move on to Mr. Morrissey. You'll have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. First question is to Mr. DeRoche, and anybody else can join in or point on it. Just briefly go back to the common fishing practice you said that you use, that you feel gives you a better assessment of the stock than when some practices are dictated on you for research purposes.
The simplest way to put it is whenever a DFO wants to work with us to collect science, instead of asking us how we catch the fish, they come out with a procedure telling us how to fish, what usually doesn't line up with the traditional ways. For example, using the gill nets, we have nets adding up to 500 fathom that will have behind the boat drifting. This way, it works as a sea anchor, so whenever you have a bit of wind pushing on your boat, it doesn't influence, and it'll keep your net stretched out. So that translates to approximately 32 nets. Whenever they had us do it based on their guidance, it was only 5 nets, and the wind played a bigger influence because the nets weren't enough of a sea anchor. So it just didn't work properly to yield any results. And fishermen have been, we've been doing it for years. We came up with a number of nets to make it work properly, and it's a practice that from the beginning we know won't work. We tell them it won't work. There's nothing else we can do other than we don't want to just deny it, the science practice, so we go out and do it anyway, knowing it's going to yield very negative results. It's been year after year now, I guess.
Okay, so you are giving testimony to this committee that the methods dictated on you by DFO is giving a distorted view of the stock. Is that what you know?
That's correct. We believe that one of the examples is the methods of science, and the other one was using the handline as well. We think that the data is well put together. It's just incorrect data because it was obtained in a manner that's just not accurate to the common fishing practices.
Okay, whoever would go. There was documentation provided to committee earlier that prior to the closure in 2022, the stock was declining in the years preceding that, where the catch rate did not match the allowable catch that was given. So, what would you account for the declining landings in mackerel? Going back over the years, my notes say 2016 going into 2022.
Personally, it was my best year in history. I just had to travel a bit more, and a lot of other vessels weren't willing to travel. And I feel that since I had to travel, it means the mackerel were not in the same areas.
So you would tell the committee that the effort put on by Fisher was not as extensive? That would have an impact on the landings being lowered?
I would say that, as well as some of the areas that were chosen for sampling may not have reflected the actual area of the fish.
But these were not sampling; these were actual landings.
Yeah, I would say with the actual landings that effort may have played a role in it for sure.
Okay, I take it all three. We're listening to Professor Roberts. And his opening statement would highlight the fact that, from his perspective, the mackerel stock in the Gulf is in a critical area. So, how can you respond to Professor Roberts' comments on that? And Professor Roberts is not DFO; he's not fishing. He's appeared before the committee before, but he would provide a different perspective than what you would be given, and it's important to, how do you respond to that? Or anyone, if you can answer it.
I believe with the data he was given, he would have no choice but to make that assumption or the decision. But we believe that at the level of collecting the data, that it was incorrect data. That's why he's getting a false sense of what the actual stock is. I believe as a fisherman that it's just not true to what's actually in the waters, and the stock is not reflected properly due to the factors previously stated, such as the sampling, such as effort. So, if you want to touch on that too, Mark.
Expand on you made the reference when you were traveling the Strait in the fall, and it was not a normal area for mackerel to be in, that you were seeing mackerel. So, yeah. Well, yes, you made the comment, but what do you define as a normal area, and why would it be important if mackerel was there where they would not normally be?
Well, it only goes to show that in years past, when fishermen were fishing, targeting mackerel, they would go to where the herring spawn is, and there wasn't the amount of schools where we are that there is now. but there's no herring spawn where we're at, or very little of it. So the guys who are
The importance of that to the committee, where the fact that there was no feeding source, you would say there would still be, in your opinion, an abundance of mackerel.
I think there's still a feeding source, and that would be lobster larvae. But that would probably indicate smaller mackerel. But the larger mackerel are on top of the herring spawn, which is not where we are. But the guys who are fishing tuna, like Lucas, will tell you that it's crazy the amount of mackerel that's there and the size of it. I want to tell you a crazy little story to go along with that. One of the guys was out fishing his bait quota for the day, which was 1,000 pounds or so. He said he didn't have time to finish his cup of tea when the crew had the 1,000 pounds on the boat. So obviously that wasn't small mackerel, and obviously there was a lot of mackerel there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrissey. Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Simard. Bienvenue au comité, encore, pour 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Perhaps you can stop my time so my friends can put on their earpieces and listen to the pretty voice of the interpreter instead of my thick and rough one. Thank you. We're good? Excellent. I'll begin with you, Mr. Robert. A very basic question, as far as I'm concerned, with regard to this study. I'd like to narrow the gap between scientific knowledge and what the harvesters see on the water. You probably know better than I do that you can always improve science. So I don't know how you can align your scientific method and the conclusions we've just heard from Mr. Arsenault and Mr. Desroches. Is there any way for you to take what these witnesses have said to validate or not your own data? I'd like to hear you on that. Thank you very much for the question. The abundance data with regard to the Canadian stocks. So we're talking about abundance to data, so females who are spawning in a certain zone, in zone 2. And we take the fertility rate of females, and that's how we calculate the number of fish in a given zone. So it's based on the number of eggs that have been spawned, and that helps us calculate the reproductive biomass of the stock. Now, obviously, it doesn't let me calculate the fish that have not spawned, such as juveniles. We don't take them into account in the method I've just described, but it's important to calculate the adult biomass because the adults are the ones who regenerate. This method was designed in Europe. We use it here in Canada, and there's a scientific consensus around this approach. Now, when it comes to the witnesses of huge schools of mackerel, I'm not doubting what harvesters are saying. Mackerel is a fish that moves, that migrates in huge schools, and there are still large amounts of this stock in Canada. So if there are many mackerel throughout the Gulf area, however, we are still underneath the reference threshold. And that's why, based on our data, based on the spawning, we are underneath the reference. And that's why we feel we should still not be fishing mackerel. Well, I understand, but last summer, I went with my colleague Alexis. We went lobster fishing to the Madeleine Islands. We went with a harvester, and there seemed to be a gap, a huge gap, between different types of fish and what fishermen were saying, what they were seeing on the ground, and what the Department of Fisheries and Oceans were saying. And the harvesters, their knowledge was based on tens of years spending their lives on the water. So, and I understand your scientific reasoning, and I'm sure that it's solid. However, is there some way to align your conclusions with the conclusions of the harvesters? In your studies, have you ever gone out on the water to see what the harvesters themselves are seeing? Well, thank you for your question. Most of my research, as I said at the beginning, I don't work for Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I'm not responsible for the assessments of stocks of the federal government, but I do conduct a lot of research. And a lot of my research is conducted in collaboration with Fisheries and Oceans. Most of the time, I use fishing vessels as my research platform. Let me give you a recent example. It was a recent study on Atlantic halibut. So we were working with the PEIFA, the FFAW in Newfoundland. So my team goes out with the harvesters. We talk to them. And clearly, we do take their observations into account. That's how we formulate hypotheses. I agree entirely with you that we must take into account the knowledge of the harvesters into our research hypotheses and our assessment of the stocks. So this information is used in our fishing data. However, if the conclusions are nevertheless different, I'm not familiar with the details of how Fisheries and Oceans makes its decisions. It must be based on some kind of science. But again, when there's such a gap between the knowledge of the harvesters themselves and the knowledge of the scientific people, how can the department make a decision that reflects the stocks that are actually swimming in the water? It seems a pretty difficult thing for me to achieve, and I just can't imagine how much this costs the harvesters. Those decisions made by the department have a huge impact on harvesters and people who also rely on the fisheries, like suppliers, for instance. So my question is, in any decision taken by Fisheries and Oceans, it has to be based on science, but also on what harvesters are seeing on the water. And I really don't know if you have the tools right now to do that. I'm sorry, I must interrupt. We're over your time. If you want, the witness can provide a written response later on. But right now, we're moving on.
Starting with Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today and appearing. I want to start with, I guess, the three at the table here today. I'll start with Mr. DeRoche because you talked about the test nets and the way that DFO is telling you to set them up and it's not efficient. This just brings to mind complaints that I've heard from the West Coast, from the Shrimp Trawlers Association, that DFO is not using efficient tow methods or net setting methods in doing the shrimp surveys on the West Coast, so they get bad numbers. They don't get a true stock assessment versus what the harvesters could actually show that there are more fish in the water than DFO's test methods state. I think you've described that fairly well, but is there anything you'd like to add on that? Did you used to test a different way? I think you said you used to test with 8 net lengths, was it? And you had different results.
To reply to that, it was 32 nets, and they put us down to 5 nets. So moving forward, I think the most accurate form of data you're going to get is if something's operating at its normal capacity. That's the best measure we have. Anytime you make a compromise, you're going to compromise your results also. So it would be a great time to make a compromise and take some of that total allowable catch from from the American source, and we can take it from the northern stock, and put a plan in place that we whenever we're fishing mackerel, whether it be the drift nets or it be the hand lines, that we record everything. We use this chance to get the best and most accurate science. So I think the most accurate form of science we're going to get is if things are running at normal operation versus a compromised method that's not going to work.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe for each of the three of you at the table, it sounds like most of you fish multiple species. How much mackerel are you encountering as bycatch when you're out fishing for other species? And are you able to retain those mackerel for bait, or what happens to them if they're caught as bycatch when you're fishing other licenses?
No, there is no bycatch for mackerel. We don't catch any. Maybe once a year you get a small one in the head of a trap, in the twine of a trap, but that's it.
You're able to be selective enough in your harvesting methods that you're not removing mackerel.
It's not a viable way to catch.
Okay, thank you. I want to switch now to Mr. Robert. Mr. Robert, you mentioned indications of high mortality from predation. Are you aware of any measures that DFO has undertaken to study the predation or reduce the predation on mackerel stocks or herring stocks?
Yeah, so the predation has been studied. So that's available in internal documents published by CSAS, and that's how we can get a sense of the amount or the importance of each predator on especially on herring, but mackerel and herring predators are about the same. And the only difference is that because mackerel is migrating way outside of the Southern Gulf, it crosses through several different predator fields, but there's no action taken by DFO to reduce the number of predators, because it would mean either a gannet or a seal cull or something like that, and that's not really acceptable.
That's interesting, because I'm referring back to a letter that was sent to the minister back in 2003, 3 years ago. And one of the recommendations in that report, number 6, was that Fisheries and Oceans Canada ensure that resources and directives are in place to ensure the department adequately studies the predator-prey interactions between seals and mackerel stocks. Are you aware of any further action on that from that recommendation?
Not really, so I cannot really speak to that.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. And one other piece in that letter with the number of recommendations, you mentioned that Canada should develop a bilateral stock management agreement, and I want to quote number 12 from the recommendations was that Fisheries and Oceans Canada develop a bilateral stock management agreement with the United States for the 2023 Atlantic mackerel season. Are you aware of any movement by Canada to establish that bilateral stock management agreement?
So talking with some people in DFO science, I know that there's a will from Canada to increase the dialogue with the U.S. counterparts, but one of the issues now is with the current geopolitics. It seems like on the U.S. side, such effort has decreased over the past couple of years.
So I'm afraid I'm going to have to jump in here. We are over time, but we'll have an opportunity for another round there. So next, I'm going to go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Robert, I will go to you in just a minute, but just briefly, Mr. Chair, I just want to welcome back a former colleague that is in this room, was part of this committee for many years, Ms. Lisa Mary Barron. So thanks for being with us again. It's nice to see you. To the fishermen first that are here, look, my dad was a fisherman all his life, and I understand, how difficult it is to see a stock that is, not in the healthy zone that we use to see the stocks. And look, I think our hopes and my dreams also is to make sure that, we got a resource that's going to be back in good health and that we will be able to have a commercial fishery again in the near future. But like I said, we want to have both sides of the medal, so I'm just going to go first to Mr. Robert. Monsieur Robert, vous avez entendu le...
Mr. Robert, you heard the harvesters a little earlier saying that when we're on the water, when we're fishing, we see a lot of mackerel on the surface. Is that a sign in and of itself that the resource is in good health? It's a sign that the fish are there, but it's not necessarily a sign that mackerel is doing well, that the stocks are healthy, because the mackerel move around over a huge surface. So from one year to the next, its position can change. It travels. And so there are schools of mackerel moving around. So if in 1 year conditions are better in one zone, clearly the people who live there are going to see lots of mackerel, even if the stocks might not be healthy. A stock is healthy when everyone in Quebec, in New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Prince Edward Island, if everybody's seeing mackerel at the same time, that means the stock is healthy. And other fishers talked about data that are collected and scientific data surveys that are conducted in a way which they think could be done differently, so differently from the way that Fisheries and Oceans does it. So do you feel that what the harvesters are proposing in terms of scientific surveys and doing those differently from the way the department is doing them now, do you think if that was taken into account, it would give a more realistic assessment of the health of the stocks? Do you think that the data used by the department is not reliable? Well, the data we use to assess the health of the stock is based on the health of the eggs and spawning. So we look at the spawning of the females, how many eggs each female will lay, and based on that number, well, rather, that's the number we use. So for us, the health of the eggs, the number of the eggs is the main factor. I'm not saying the other factors are not important. They are, but they're complementary. Now, when it comes to the type of fishing gear used for mackerel, I personally am not familiar enough to speak to what DFO is imposing and what fishers are proposing to use. Well, as I said earlier, I hope, and I think everyone here hopes, that we'll have a commercial mackerel fishery to help the harvesters, to help the fishers. And quickly, because I don't have a lot of time left, some officials came before the committee on Monday. Now, when it comes to the mackerel, to stocks of mackerel in the U.S. versus here in Canada, so there are American contingents in the south, and then there's the northern Canadian contingents. Can you explain the difference between the two? Because there seem to be a lot of opinions on these two contingents. I think you mentioned earlier that they're fishing some of ours, but can you describe that to us exactly so we can understand the difference between these two stocks or contingents? Well, the Canadian contingent, we fish it in the summer during spawning and feeding periods. And that's when the American contingent is separate, is far away from the American one. So we are only fishing Canadian fish, if you will. Now, in the U.S., they fish in the wintertime in a zone when both contingents are overwintering there. So in the U.S., part of those fish belong to the Canadian contingent. So that fishery at that time affects the abundance of Canadian stocks as well as the abundance of the American stocks, and that's where the distinction lies. Thank you very much. We'll now move to Mr. Simard for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. I don't have a lot of time, so I'll be brief. A little earlier, you talked about the problem related to the bait fishery. As far as I understand, 100% of the bait that you purchase benefits from a tax deduction for you. You can tell me whether that's true or not. And there are specific licenses for the bait fishery. And if so, do you have access to those licenses? And would that be enough for you to fish enough bait yourselves? Or are you looking for a commercial fishery for mackerel?
Sufficient if we could use it, but we're not using it. By the time we just get our lobster season going the last couple of years, and the second quarter opens up, and it's only open for 2 days while we're busy with lobster, so we don't have a chance to get one, right? If we're open the 1st of August, we've tried that for the last 2 years to get it open the 1st of August, so at least we could participate in the fall fishery, but it hasn't worked. But I'd just like to say, you know, everybody, fishers from everywhere, I talk to people from all over the East Coast, and fishers from everywhere tell me the same story. So where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's a lot of smoke and there's a lot of fire in Eastern Canada when it comes to mackerel, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if the science maybe needs some different forms of work, like Lucas said, but we're definitely too far apart to make sense. It doesn't make sense.
And yeah, to touch on that, whether it's bait or commercial, it's bait would be great. That gives more fishermen access, but with commercial access itself, it's still going to allow Canadian fishers to supply Canadian fishers with bait instead of having to buy it from outside sources. And yes, we don't have to pay tax on the sale of bait, but we do face like inflated prices year in and year out. Like right now, there's talks of a pound of mackerel going for close to $4, when just 7 years ago it was a little over $1. So access is what we want.
Merci beaucoup.
Juste peut-être vous demander de déposer.
Perhaps you can give us in writing what a good bait fishing period would be, if you could give that to the committee after. Thank you.
Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes. Oh,
he's going to start, and then I'm going to go.
Okay, Mr. Small for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is to Mr. Robert. Mr. Robert, historically, beyond the last 30 years, the Gulf of St. Lawrence would completely freeze over every winter. Harp seals would reproduce there typically, but this is not happening these days. Historically, mackerel reproduced in these same waters when water temperatures at various times of the year were very different than they are today. Now, you know the ecosystem has changed. You're a climate change believer, and I believe it's changing as well. But fish depend on certain temperatures to thrive and reproduce. So why is science still looking for mackerel larvae where they looked 30 years ago instead of trying to find out where the mackerel are reproducing today? Why is there not a concerted effort to find out where these mackerel are actually spawning? You know the harp seals aren't reproducing there. You know that because you can fly over and see it. So can you square that circle for me, sir?
Yeah. Thank you for your question. So you're totally right that the system has changed quickly. However, one thing that hasn't changed is that there's still a winter. So basically, the system becomes cold, okay, in the winter, and then the temperature will re-increase. So there's freezing temperature at the surface of the Gulf anyway. The temperature will re-increase in the spring, and the mackerel follows temperatures that are about...
May I interrupt for 1 second? How deep is the water in the Gulf in the Northumberland Strait? 15, 20 fathoms? You think that water doesn't get cold right down to the bottom and warm up right down to the bottom with the season changing?
But the mackerel doesn't spawn in the Northumberland Strait, and there's no station
But that's
for...
where they look for the larvae.
No, that's not there. It's up north in the Southern Gulf. There's no station for larvae. It's eggs, actually, not larvae. There's no station in the Northumberland Strait. They're up north of the strait. And the thing is, the waters, the temperature increases, the mackerel come in and they spawn. And where I totally agree with you is that this survey should be expanded at least 3 or 4 years to see adjacent areas. So far, the synthesis of data that we have shows that there's no or not much spawning outside of the Southern Gulf, but this should be monitored regularly because with the changes, it's not impossible that the mackerel spawning area could change.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Alors, je vais commencer avec ma question.
I'll ask my question of Mr. Robert. Thank you for being here. This is one of my first times on this committee. What I seem to understand is that the science doesn't agree with what the harvesters are saying. In the Charlevoix region where I am, there is an abundance of striped bass. That's what the fishers are saying, and science is saying, no, not at all. So there's this huge gap between the two sides. And my follow-up question is, when you do a calculation or an estimation, for me, the harvesters have their own science. Do you take the harvester science into account, or at a certain point do you tell them, no, our numbers are solid and your numbers are not? How do you do your calculations? Well, there's the process of assessing stocks, and we also include numbers from the commercial fishery, and those are the first data that we use in assessing stocks. Apologies. If they're limited in fishing, doesn't that falsify your numbers? Well, sure, it's more difficult. If there's a moratorium or there's no fishing, we can't get that data. And I agree with you, that's the case right now for the spring herring or the mackerel. There's not a lot of fishing going on there, but generally, there's always a small fishing quota, a minimal one, and we can extrapolate measures that come directly from the fishers. So the catch by unit of effort. So the effort put in by the fishers to make landings. Well, I agree with you, but what we're hearing here now is that in a few minutes they reach their quota and they're not allowed to fish anymore. But you're saying the stocks are low, stop fishing. So there's a huge disconnection here. And it's important that we listen to the harvesters. What they're saying has to be taken into account. Last question for you. In your calculations, do you take into account the survival of harvesters and fishers? If we stop the fishing, do you take the consequences into account? Please, a very brief answer. That would be appreciated. Well, one, it's not me. It's the department that can address that. And second, there's an advisory committee which aligns the socio-economic reality of harvesters with the science. So there is an advisory committee which is there to moderate between the two sides. Thank you very much.
With Mr. Connors.
Good day. My first question is for either Mark or Lucas, and both of you can put in on it. So we all know the negative impact if we fish in the critical zone and what that would cause. What would be any negative impacts if we do not fish the mackerel that are currently, as you said, as a quantity out there or quota out there that needs to be fished would there be any negative impacts?
Thanks for the question. I feel one of the negative impacts is a large part of the mackerel's diet is lobster larvae. And earlier there was a talk on eggs and larvae. I think it was confused about what Clifford was saying was over in the Strait there's samples taken for the largest amount of lobster larvae, and we think that if there isn't sampling done for the mackerel, maybe they should, since it's a large part of their diet. It makes sense for them to be there. So I just wanted to add that, but I think that the risks would be, especially if somebody else is going to be fishing the same stock and selling it back to us, it's not very beneficial to the individual fisherman.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Is that all?
You're good.
I'll back up what Lucas just said 100%. And a while ago, something was mentioned about bass. But we have the same issue with that. We're fighting science all the time in bass. But that is also a predator to lobster, maybe more so, I'm not sure. But it is my feeling and the feeling of a lot of fishers that we need to balance the wheel. We got a lot of predators chasing our lobster. That's all we got left to fish. If you're taking out a lot of lobster at the larva stage, who the hell knows how many? And then you get the predation of bass later when the lobsters are bigger. We're putting an extreme pressure on the only resource we have for income right
now. My next question was, were you ever consulted or asked about the research technique and how what you should be doing? You mentioned so many nets and so many hooks and lines. Were you ever asked what input you should be, or what for input on that?
I've been to quite a few meetings, and I've never been personally asked, and neither has our organization that I recall. I know we've more or less been told what to do versus how to do it, and then we give lots of suggestions and lots of ideas after the fact, but they usually don't stray much at all.
Well, I can't add to doing science for mackerel. I didn't do any, but I did a couple of years ago for halibut, and it was the same thing. We were told where to go. Rather than go where we think the fish might be, they wanted to tag some fish. Well, you can't tag fish you don't catch. So let the fishermen help you make the decision of where you should go if you're targeting something. And if you want accurate data, Lucas is a good man to find some mackerel. Let him find the mackerel. Let him tell you how to catch it. Because that's what he does. You don't catch mackerel.
Lucas, you have never been asked where to go and do the sampling?
No, never been asked. We've just been told. And it would be great if according to where science wants us to go, if they thought the fish would be in the same area at the same time every year, because if fishing was that easy, everyone would be doing it, but it's just not the case.
Mr. Roberts, I'm sorry. Mr. Roberts, not asking the people who are participating in the fishery to for advice on the research, is that a standard practice, or is it they just told where to go and do the samples?
So, yeah, that's a good question. So once a survey has been organized and planned, then of course there is precise stations where people need to go and fish. The consultation should come ahead of any survey plan, and of course myself working often with industry, I fully agree that a dialogue should exist between fisheries and oceans and industry to make sure that everybody is on the same page and everybody buys in to the surveys that are being conducted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connors. That's going to take our panel to a close. I just want to thank our witnesses for taking their time to be here today and provide testimony for this the study that we're working on right now. And your testimony is going to be very helpful as we finalize the report and, importantly, the recommendations to government. But with that, we're going to briefly suspend while we welcome our next panel.
Thank you.
And I just would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the new witnesses, although I think they might have heard this in the audience. Just make sure that, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for interpretation, en ce qui concerne l'interprétation.
For interpretation, for those of you who are in the room, you can use the earpieces and choose the channel you want to listen to the interpretation.
Comments should be addressed through the chair. And with that, I'd like to welcome our witnesses here today. We have Trevor Barlow, fisherman, et nous avons Ghislaine Collin, le président regroupement des pêcheurs pélagiques professionnels du sud de la Gaspésie. So with that, we are going to start with opening statements for 5 minutes or less, starting with Mr. Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for inviting me here today to speak to you about the spring herring and the mackerel fisheries in the east coast of Canada, and particularly in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence. My name is Trevor Barlow. I'm a fisherman from the west end of Prince Edward Island, and I've been a herring and mackerel fisherman since 1998, and I've been the chair or co-chair of the Small Pelagic Board since 1999, and still am today. I have attended countless meetings over this time period for both fisheries. I'd like to start today with the spring herring, if I may, and the differences of what we as fishermen are seeing on the water versus DFO science data. The spring herring, from what I can see by looking out and not being able to fish, has made a strong recovery and looks very healthy, with more and more spawning events taking place every spring. The reason I believe DFO science is not as optimistic as fishermen is due to a change they made in their data collection over the years. When the fishery was in decline and the total allowable catch was not being met, DFO science started looking for reasons to explain why they seemed to be overestimating the stock biomass. One thing was assumed was their acoustic survey was potentially counting fish twice by following their migratory patterns. The survey began in the Bay of Chaleur, then moved outside of the bay to the north shore of PEI and up the west coast to Cape Breton. But now they only do the inside of the Bay of Chaleur and a little small area on the outside of the Bay of Chaleur. We are managing a migratory stock based on a stationary snapshot. By shrinking the survey area, DFO has effectively created a coverage gap. If the fish aren't in that specific area during the survey window, the model assumes they don't exist. Also, before making this change, they did not fully assess how other management measures being enforced by DFO to the industry may have impacted the TAC results, such as no night fishing, changes to opening dates, and weekend closures to allow for recruitment. When restrictions are placed on when to fish, catches will naturally drop. DFO interpreted this drop as a lack of fish, when in reality, their own conservation efforts were contributing factors. Management measures resulting in conservation success should not be misread as fish decline or industry collapse. In absence of a commercial fishery, DFO is relying solely on data from their acoustic survey, which covers only a fraction of the historical grounds it once did, and it does not mirror what fishermen are seeing. Although DFO has begun using other data sources, they do not provide data on abundance. I believe all of these factors have caused the stock biomass to be underestimated. Moving on to the mackerel fishery, again, there seems to be differences between what we as fishermen are seeing versus DFO science data. The fishery appears to have made a remarkable recovery to what I would call historic levels within my career. But it's hard to know for sure when you're not allowed to fish. I do believe it can support a commercial fishery, but I do not believe it can be the historic fishery it once was, when the reason for the collapse of the stock has not yet been addressed by the DFO management. Back in the early 2000s, DFO moved one goalpost and not the other by adding capacity to the fishery in Newfoundland, but did nothing to add more recruitment or protection of recruitment for the region. Prior to adding new tuxine licenses to the Fisheries of Newfoundland, which I might add was against the advice of DFO science at the time, our region was healthy, had never experienced any concern, decline, or closure of the fishery, which indicates capacity mismanagement versus overfishing. We never needed a total shutdown. We never had an overfishing problem. We had a management-induced capacity problem with the entire East Coast has since been paying for. We needed responsible capacity limits, which we saw work for decades. In conclusion, a total closure of these two fisheries is blind management strategy. Zero fishing does not mean zero fish, it means zero data available to evaluate and make proper decisions around fishing. Without a commercial fishery, DFO is navigating in the dark. We need to reopen these commercial fisheries immediately with responsible management measures in place. Thank you for your time.
Very much, Mr. Barlow. Et nous allons maintenant entendre.
And now we'll hear from Mr. Collins for 5 minutes. Today I'm appearing before the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans for the 4th time to present the views of the group I represent on herring and mackerel fishing, two pelagic species mainly exploited by our members. The position of the Regroupement des pêcheurs pélagiques professionnels is clear. The controlled reopening of commercial fishing would make it possible to collect essential scientific data through mandatory catch reporting, logbooks, entry calls, and weigh-ins at docks, allow fleets affected by moratoriums to resume their activities, recreate 2 or 3 jobs per vessel in the affected coastal regions, ensure the supply of quality bait for fishermen who depend on it, and generate economic spin-offs in regions that have lost their pelagic fleets. Unlike the commercial sector, bait fishing has several significant limitations. First, this type of fishing does not allow for the collection of scientific data on herring and mackerel stocks, or allows for very little. This lack of data prevents rigorous monitoring of the state of resources, which is essential for sustainable and responsible management. Furthermore, bait fishing provides no concrete assistance to fishermen who are experiencing difficulties due to the moratoriums or restrictions, nor does it generate significant economic benefits in coastal regions, unlike organized commercial fishing, which promotes job creation and local economic activity. Finally, it's important to note that, from a tax perspective, the deductions applicable to bait in Canada make it more advantageous to purchase bait than to invest in fishing operations to obtain it. This situation accentuates the economic limitations of bait fishing and reduces the incentives for structured exploitation of the resource. Scientific data play a fundamental role in the rigorous assessment of herring and mackerel stocks. Responsible management of fishery resources depends on the ability to collect and analyze this information on an ongoing and reliable basis. In this regard, Quebec's pelagic fishermen are notable for their active involvement in the collection of essential data, which is integrated into the very operation of commercial fishing. In the context of a moratorium on herring and mackerel fishing, it's essential to recognize the impact suffered by the fleets concerned. So when fishing eventually resumes or opens, it seems legitimate that these fleets should be given priority for the allocation of commercial, exploratory, scientific, or other licenses. We're asking for priority access for emerging fisheries in the coming years. This approach aims to support the fishing communities affected while ensuring rigorous scientific monitoring and sustainable exploitation of the resource. In conclusion, the management of fishery resources in coastal regions affected by moratoriums requires a structured approach focused on sustainability and respect for local communities. Well-organized coastal commercial fishing, which favors the use of selective gear, such as gill nets or hooks, ensures the preservation of species while generating economic benefits for the regions concerned. This method not only offers an environmentally friendly solution, but also contributes to the collection of scientific data essential for stock monitoring. By adopting this approach, we can ensure the future of species while supporting fishermen affected by restrictions. The economic, environmental, and scientific benefits of structured fishing are inseparable from the sustainable of coastal communities and the effective management of marine resources. Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. And with that,
first round of questioning with Mr. Small for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is to Mr. Barlow. Mr. Barlow, on Monday we had Monsieur Vigneault here from Director of DFO Science. And he told us about how mature year classes of mackerel that were capable of reproducing, he almost painted a picture of them being non-existent, and that the younger year classes were increasing somehow. I don't know where their parents are, but anyway, what do you think of the picture that DFO's got on the year class distribution of mackerel?
Well, I will say that I believe they're totally wrong. And you're right, maybe there is a lot of immaculate conception out there in the mackerel fishery. I don't know, I'm not out there. But I know I done the mackerel net, the test survey this spring, and it's a tin net fishery. It don't work. I tried to explain it last year at AMAC. I sat there with science, argued that the boats don't drift right with those 10 nets. It just, the longest I had the nets in the water was 3 hours. I was supposed to be out there all night. I couldn't keep them in any more than 3 hours. I had them tangled around the boat more times and twisted. I had more headaches than it was worth. But I did get their samples for them, but not good ones.
In the spring election, the Prime Minister made the comment, and in fact he made it in St. John's, Newfoundland, that basically the decision-making under his government would be based on what he was hearing at the wharves. Have you seen any of that in terms of mackerel?
No, none.
Do you expect to see it? Do you think this study could spur him on to keep his election promise?
Well, I'll put it this way: when the minister asked for the science to be redone this spring, and they're doing it now, I guess. If they don't see improvements, they better clean house, because the eggs were literally running out of the fish when I done the sample. If they can't find the sample, and I mean, 2 years ago, was it 25 or maybe it was 23 AMAC? We sat there and science said they couldn't find eggs, but they found lots of larvae, numerous, all kinds of larvae. Well, to me, that tells me it's in better shape. It's better to find the larvae than it is to find the eggs, but it means it's not eggs, it doesn't go in the model.
So you've lived in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, Southern Gulf, all your life. You've seen quite a few changes in the ecosystem, and water temperatures have changed, and there's variations in migration. So do you think that maybe DFO science should be looking everywhere except where they used to look, possibly?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I know they have went looking at once. They never done it consistently over the years to get the timing right. Maybe I don't know. That's.
I guess you can recall pretty well when the closure of the mackerel fishery happened, and certain NGOs who I get a letter from once in a while asking for a meeting did victory laps around the mackerel closure. Now at AMEC, what kind of influence are these NGOs having compared to the influence of harvesters such as yourselves on the decision-making process?
As fishermen in the Southern Gulf, I believe between New Brunswick, PEI, maybe Nova Scotia, and the southern part, I think we have 5 seats at the table. There's at least 3 NGOs, maybe more, that are sitting at them tables too, so they're getting pretty weighted.
So do you think that DFO Science is listening more to the NGOs than they are to you?
I think they probably got no choice. I mean, when they're...
And do you think there's any correlation between the fact that these NGOs are basically U.S. funded, shutting down our mackerel fishery, and that Americans are jumping from 833 tons last year to almost 11,000 tons this year? Do you think that's money well spent by the Americans?
Well, it is certainly for them, but and I raised that exact issue 2 weeks ago at AMAC. I brought it up, at least get the donor list, but they, you know.
So, to Monsieur Cullen, I heard you talking about the importance of a commercial fishery, and I certainly agree with you. Which type of commercial gear would you think would be best suited to get an accurate representation for science of the year class distributions and whatnot.
Well, herring, spring herring, gill nets, and for mackerel, hooks, gill nets. But with mackerel, well, gill nets, it's during the spawning time, so we're reluctant to use those. But if the department wants data, thank you very much.
We are right at time there. And next we are going to go to Mr. Morrissey for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to focus more on the herring fishery because it has not got a lot of discussion here, and we're referencing the spring herring fishery. My question, Mr. Barlow, could you brief the committee on the difference between the spring and the fall herring fishery, and is it a different stock?
Yeah, it's two totally different stocks. It's just genetically, it's been proven that when one spawns in the spring, it's a different component compared to the fall.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but your testimony was referencing, from your perspective, the health of the spring herring stock. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so that's what I want to focus on. You said from your perspective, it looks very healthy, and then you made the reference, change DFO made in science methodology. Could you expand a little bit more on what, from your perspective as Fisher, what they changed in the methodology that you view is not adequately capturing the true health of the biomass?
Well, when the TAC wasn't being met by fishers, DFO went looking for reason why they were overestimating the TAC. And one of the reasons they come up with was the acoustic survey possibly could have been counting fish twice. As they moved out of the bay, their boat, they assumed, followed the fish to the east. But there was no evidence to prove that that's what was happening. They just assumed that, and they reduced the acoustic survey from doing the whole southern Gulf to just doing the inside of the Bay of Chaleur and a small portion outside of the bay. When in fact they used to do all the North Shore PEI, in around Pictou Island, and up the west coast of Cape Breton.
You said the stock biomass was underestimated, that the fishery it once was. Could you explain a bit more?
I don't.
You reference, they're not capturing the fishery that it once was because they're underestimating the stock biomass.
Well, if you look at just acoustics, they got nothing else to input to show abundances. Like, used to be a CPUE from the commercial fishery, a phone survey, and a few other things that go into it, but they got nothing other than the acoustic survey to show abundance now.
Do the one type of survey on spring herring?
Well, since the closure, they started a test net fishery, which is a small net that.
Is that the one you were referencing about them only allowing you 10 nets?
No, that was in the mackerel survey.
That was on the mackerel side.
In the spring herring, there's a small test net, has different panels of nets, that when you hang it up in this room, the panels hang in a V, like an hourglass, which wouldn't catch a fish if you tried to drive one into it. And they're trying to make a model out of that. It'll catch a fish, I guess. Maybe that's all they want.
And was that herring or mackerel?
That was herring.
That was herring.
Yes.
And so if, from you as a fisher, long-term fisher, you would view that would have not accurately reflected what may have been in the water.
Well, you probably get some age discrepancies in the different panels, but there's no way to possibly get an abundance from that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you made reference to management-induced fishery.
That was in the mackerel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Back in the early 2000s when you're talking about adding the seaning fishery? So,
Well, yeah, that's, yeah, you referenced it, explain, and that's why I want you to elaborate more on things were going good in your words. And then, yeah, the problem was from a management induced.
well, when you add capacity to a fishery and be able to remove, have the capability of catching more fish, it's obviously something's going to happen, right? If you don't add more eggs, I mean, it stands to reason with any fishery. Like if it was a lobster fishery, you add more licenses, well, you got to add more recruitment somehow. Am I correct?
In the time of life, you reference, and could you give, in your opinion to the committee, you reference going forward we need responsible management practices. How would you describe a responsible management practice? And I would like your opinion on both the spring herring as well as mackerel.
Well, you can't repeat what we did, plain and simple.
Expand a bit more. Repeat what we did.
Well,
what did we do? What went wrong?
There was never. Let's go with the mackerel. There was never a closure in the mackerel before, until there was added effort. And then when you add effort, and then all of a sudden the TAC wasn't being met before either. So maybe it was science. I don't know what caused it. But when you started catching the TAC, things went pieces. We weren't seeing the fish coming back to the spawning grounds. But we seen it. I was probably one of the first to seen it as a gill netter. You're the first that's going to see the reduction, and you're also going to be the first to see the improvements.
I'm afraid, Mr. Morris, I'm going to have to jump in here because we're past time. But there will be another opportunity to ask questions. But mais prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschênes pour 6 minutes.
But now we'll go to Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes. Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses for being here, and nice to see my colleagues here. I'd like to come back to the 2022 moratorium, which was announced at the last minute, and which really made it difficult for your members. A letter was sent by the Standing Committee of the Fisheries Committee in 2023, and in the letter, we asked the Minister of Fisheries that when a moratorium was imposed, that DFO negotiate some kind of compensation for the harvesters whose livelihoods were completely affected. You and your members and the group, were you consulted since 2023 with regard to some kind of financial compensation? No, we were completely ignored. And you had meetings recently with regional directors of the department? Yes, but as they told us, they're only the messengers. They have no decision-making powers. There was never any opening for compensation? No, never. Today we're talking about mackerel, and you're saying that your fleets should be prioritized if the fishery is opened again. Our harvesters were shunted aside. We don't know why. It's clear that if we can bring these harvesters out again, they're ready to go. The vessels are ready to go. We lost jobs in a region which is already very poor, so we're going to do everything we can to get those jobs back. What's the state of your members? How are they doing right now? Well, 5 years without an income in a business which needs to be rebuilt from scratch. They've lost their crews. They've lost some equipment. They're working with very dangerous equipment. The nets, the gill nets, that's the most dangerous part of the fishery. Really, they're going to have to start from the beginning again. It's really bad. It's really unfortunate. If they don't go back on the water, they lose the expertise. Once the fishery opens again, well, who's going to fish with these nets? The expertise will be gone if they don't get on the water soon. You're also proposing to reopen the commercial mackerel fishery, but to have it be controlled. What do you mean? Commercial fishery does not mean a free-for-all or huge quantities. It would be structured. It would be organized. We already have electronic logbooks. We have scales. If scientists want certain type of fish, if they are to be counted on the dock, we'll do that. The only way to collect data is through commercial fisheries, and we don't have to have huge quotas. I know for the government it's a different kind of fishery, but it's the only kind of fishery that yields scientific data. Ask anyone. Last year, there were no scientific data on the mackerel. If you do science, if you remember university, if your original sample is not good, your study is biased. And we heard it earlier, 15 fishers were fishing in the Baie des Chaleurs were used to get a total picture of the fishery in that whole entire region. So they used two groups of fishermen in Newfoundland and in Quebec to get an entire image of the state of the of mackerel stocks. That doesn't make sense. If you were in university doing a paper, you'd fail. At this point, are your members observing what's happening on the water? Sure. We have some members we sent out to collect data in the Atlantic. Quebec has no research projects, so we're going through New Brunswick. So we needed fishermen in north of New Brunswick. I was out there solo all summer. What do you mean the quantities there? Our tools are, we're used to seeing mackerel. And right now, we don't have to go anywhere. Go out on the dock at any time. Go out to any dock. The mackerel is there. It's plentiful. What I know is the southern part of Gaspésie from Carleton to Percé. And now we know that there are many on the North Shore. Bécono, Komodo 7,800 kilometers long. So the vessels, the boats are on the water, and the fish are everywhere. Well, the department seems reluctant. They seem to have opinions. They seem to think the stocks are low. Can you tell us the difference between gill nets and hooks? How can that reassure the department? Well, it's an ecological approach. The fish will bite the hook. We already have the fishing equipment for that stock. We have fishing boats that are set up for the mackerel fishery, and they'll just come up. It's a really environmental way of fishing the mackerel. It's very selective, and if we see the fish are small, we stop right away. We go elsewhere. Everything is good. It all works. There's nothing negative about our approach and our equipment. Thank you very much.
Now with Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes.
Thank you. If you could just pause the timer before we start my questioning time, I'd like to just ask for an update from the chair. At the last meeting, we passed a motion that it be reported to the House that the minister has failed to appear on the study on coastal and marine protections. Could you update the committee on when that report might be tabled in the House?
Sure. Yeah, I'm just waiting for the reports, and then once I have that report, I'll table it in the House. So I'm just waiting on that from the clerk and the analyst.
Any idea on time frame?
Very soon. Very soon.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your patience, witnesses. I really appreciate it. I want to start out with Mr. Barlow, please. In your opinion, are stock assessments being conducted efficiently and effectively on the herring stocks?
No, not on the spring herring stock, no.
And how could they be better conducted?
Putting fishers on the water. That's the only way you're going to get data. Like, there's just this here going out and try to get a fisher here or a fisher there with a net. over thousands of kilometers of coastline. It's like, and you got to put your net in at 6 o'clock in the evening, and you got to have it out at 4 in the morning. It's ridiculous.
Okay. Are you aware of where DFO took their direction from on how to do these herring stock assessments?
No.
No?
No.
Do you know if it was directed by any science within DFO, or was it other influence?
Well, I know for the last, the 5-net commercial, we asked for it because before we were using this little net that was absolutely just nothing. But I mean, even with the 5-net commercial fishery, it does give you maybe a little more of abundance if you're lucky, but you're still only one guy out there looking over thousands of kilometers of water trying to find a fish. It's like you got to go, you know.
Should DFO be asking the fishermen where the fish are?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned the reason for the collapse of stock hasn't been addressed. Could you elaborate a little further on that? I think you said that in your opening remarks.
Well, prior to the closure in 2022, and I'm going to talk a little bit as more than just myself, is Prince Edward Island has been asking for different management measures for exactly 10 years prior. We seen it coming, and we were asking for things to change for 10 years, and nobody listened. Not one acknowledgement towards it in 10 years.
And in that 10 years, the stock declined to the point where it had to be?
I don't believe it had to be closed, but it was declining over those 10 years. The TAC wasn't being met. No, I know people would say different, but the TAC wasn't being met even at I think it was 80-some hundred ton. The TAC wasn't being met.
Okay, this sounds similar to, my background is somewhat with Fish and Wildlife Management in British Columbia, and they do catch effort surveys. So how much time you spent on the water, or whether if it's wildlife, it's on the land, in order to reach your harvest. Has that ever been considered by DFO, or should that be considered to survey fishermen for the actual catch effort that they had to exert in order to catch their quota?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. It should be something that's there. I mean, it kind of is there with the dockside monitoring program. They ask you how many net you fished and how much you got. I mean, that's as much. It's daily trips.
Because I think with the previous witnesses on mackerel, they said they're catching their quota in 2 days, basically. So would you predict the same situation with the herring?
Oh, for sure. I mean, if we look at the last opening in the spring herring we had, I think it was just in the Southern Gulf, and I mean, it's only a fraction of the mackerel fishery. But the quotas were similar. I think we had a 500-ton TAC, and I believe our area was shut down in 7 days or 6-7 days. And it only, like, I'm going to say 25 boats.
So would that be indicating a high abundance of herring?
Well, it definitely was improved was improving when they closed it.
Okay, yeah. Mr. Collin, you said you were never, I believe you said you were never told the reasons for some of the decisions. Was that correct? That harvesters were never told?
C'est juste.
Yes, that's right.
Further?
For the spring herring, we know, on a su 48 heures.
We found out 48 hours before that the fishery would be shut down, and harvesters would spend a lot of money before, but it was a very cavalier way for us to find out 48 hours before.
Arnold, next we're going to go to Mr. Clausen for 5 minutes.
Oops. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. During this study, Mr. Barlow, we've heard reports from harvesters about large schools of mackerel in Canadian waters. From what you're seeing on the water, do these schools appear to consistently mostly of young fish or mature fish capable of reproducing?
I see the schools of fish. I got no way to tell you that because I'm not allowed to fish it.
Okay. Mr. Robert in the former hour stated that the main factors in the stock health assessment is the condition of the eggs. Mr. Barlow, how would you assess the health of the stock?
Well, in my opening statement, I said it looks to be historic. In my fishing career since 1998, it's historical, the stock. Like, I don't know whether any of you have heard tell of the 1999 year class. It used to be the big talk in the mackerel fishery was the 1990 year class. It was going to last for generations. Right now, it's bigger, and I'd say there's probably 2, maybe 3 year classes out there that's bigger than the 99 year class.
It feels like from what we're hearing here today that there's a bit of a disconnect between the science information and the harvester's information. And again, you stated that there needs to be more cooperation. We need to work together. You stated we need to reopen these fisheries with responsible management in your opening statement. And I'm just wondering if you can define responsible management and how it differs from what you're seeing the way the fisheries is being managed right now.
Well, I think if you're asking me about responsible, we're all responsible for the fishery, is what I'm getting at when it comes to responsible management. I mean, we have to get the science. Like, there's no way science should be saying one thing and fishermen seeing the opposite. There's just absolutely no way that should happen, and we got to correct that if we're going to have a responsible fishery. It has to be fixed somehow. I don't know. Don't ask me. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a fisherman. But we shouldn't be miles apart, and that's got to get fixed. I just don't know how we do it, and maybe it's smart. I know there's got to be smarter people than me that can figure that out. And it's the same with the heron. We're miles apart. I just don't know how you fix it.
Okay, I'll put the question to Mr. Collin, perhaps. Then, Mr. Barlow said that he comes with a lot of information, but he's not a scientist, and there's obviously scientists that aren't harvesters. So, from your perspective, how should this management happen, and how could we align the management between harvesters and scientists a little more closely?
First, you can't open the door. It goes against science. It doesn't contribute to science. When it comes to the commercial fishery, those who can, they'll be able to do so. That's when it would start. With a commercial fishery, that's where you'd get data, and that would be the way to get data. And to open the bait fishery, there's no obligation to declare landings. It really doesn't make sense.
During this, to Mr. Collin, during this study, we've heard reports from harvesters about large schools of mackerel. And mackerel is, as you know, a transboundary species that migrates between Canadian and U.S. waters. From your experience, can you explain whether there's different stocks of mackerel in Canada and in the U.S.?
Well, first, I listened to the panel this week, and we heard scientists say that, no, the U.S. have their own contingents, we have our own. And a little earlier, the scientists said, no, they overlap. Well, I'm not a scientist, but I know the fish travels. So I believe the U.S. are fishing Canadian fish. We're going to protect the resource to let the U.S. catch the fish.
Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Simard pour 2 minutes et demie.
Mr. Simard for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. You said 2 things which are really important, Mr. Collin. First, I have 2.5 minutes. Let's be quick. I'd like you to come back on the distinction between commercial fishing and bait fishing. From what I understand is that bait fishing, instead of preserving the resource, will be problematic versus properly managing the commercial fishery. You said something else that was really interesting. Mr. Robert, in answer to one of my colleagues, said that if you see mackerel in Quebec or in the Maritimes or everywhere, it's because the stocks are healthy. But in answer to my colleague, Mr. Deschênes, you said that people are seeing that the stocks are everywhere. You've seen them. People in the Maritimes have seen them. But is there anyone at Fisheries who can take all of that information? And so can you answer those two questions, bait fishery versus commercial fishery and seeing the stocks? Well, in Quebec, all the fishers say there's mackerel everywhere. I'm listening to the panel. I'm listening to the fishers from Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. They're saying that the stock is abundant. And then we have someone from Prince Edward Island who said the same thing. What Mr. Robert said, well, I think we're validating here. Now, bait versus commercial. The bait fishery is not useful. It just helps fishers get their bait. Bait is expensive, but it's tax deductible. So sure, you'll pay for it, but you'll get it back the following tax year. There's no obligation to declare. You're not allowed to give it, to barter it, to sell it. Some people will get the fish directly into their nets, and then they'll cage them. It's really hard to follow the trail of the bait fishery. But with the commercial fishery, there are log books, there are registrations, there's all kinds of tools where you can monitor the catches. And the system is much more strict for the commercial fishery, and it's a lot more efficient. As I said earlier, if you want data for the fisheries, you couldn't get them last year, but you can through the commercial fishery. Thank you. And in the time left, we have 2 3-minute turns for Mr. Hardy and for the Liberal. Over to you for 3 minutes.
Merci. Écoutez, je vais faire un
I'll draw a parallel. In Montmorency, Charlevoix, we have striped bar fishery, and the fishers are saying the same thing. They're seeing them everywhere. They're not allowed to keep them, even though they fish them. And now they're wondering, they're calling here, and DFO says, no, that's an illusion. There are not enough of them out there. So my question for Mr. Barley, you say you're seeing historic levels here. Do you feel that your knowledge on the ground or on the water and versus the calculations made by scientists, are they aligned? Do you feel that DFO scientists are using the right methods to calculate the size of the stocks?
No, they're not. I don't know what they're doing wrong or what's happening, but we're not aligned at all. And what the fish is out there and what science is saying, we're not even in the same book, let alone the same page.
Donc, en gros, tu sais, je veux dire, mes enfants.
In short, well, my kids are still in school, and when they're learning math, again, if the premise is false, you'll get the wrong answer. So at school, you get points for effort, but in your case, it costs careers and it costs livelihoods. So do you feel that scientists perceive your knowledge as scientific, or do you feel, and this question is for both of you, do you feel that scientists sometimes perceive harvesters as not caring about the resource and not minding overfishing it? Because really all you want to do is earn money. Do you feel sometimes you're perceived that way? Mr. Collins? Yes. But in Quebec, we do tests for striped bass in Lévis, and we ask for zones for emerging fisheries, and we fish striped bass with hooks, and they're not eating the same thing in Lévis as in the Baie du Chaleur. In Baie du Chaleur, they're having lobster. There's no lobster in Lévis. So when the scientist in Lévis says that the stock is doing well, she should lose her job because things are good in Lévis and there's abundance. But in Gaspésie, we requested for the fishery to be emergent, and the flesh is worth a lot, and it's great for tourism, for restaurants, but we're still waiting for a decision. Mr. Barler mentioned this earlier, but you have data, you have sonar, you're equipped. It might not be theoretical or science on paper, but you can demonstrate that the resource is there. Well, I'm a former lobster fisherman. I have pictures of striped bass entering the lobster cages. I have photos of that. And we showed these photos to DFO. So there is a ton of striped bass out there. Thank you very much. Mr. Hardy?
Finish our panel with Mr. Morrissey for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Before a question, Trevor, I understand you have some evidence, some photos, and maybe on a disc that you would like to present to the committee. That can be forwarded to the chair, to the clerk that can follow in. So before you leave, make sure you do it. My question to you would be, if the department went back to the fishers and asked you to provide a test sampling methodology that you feel would better reflect what's in what the resource is that something you could quantify and document and provide to the department? Trevor?
Come back to me and ask me, like, on how to do science?
To the fishers and about the herring and mackerel. To say, okay, there's a disreferencing. Clearly, there is a difference. And I've seen some of it myself this summer on observing on the water. So, if the department came to the fishers and said, okay, provide to the department I'll use the term methodology or process that could be engaged with fishers that would more accurately reflect the biomass. Is that something the industry could provide, fishers could provide? And how would you do it? You mentioned about the nets not enough, timing. We hear different things. You're looking in the wrong place at the wrong time. The nets are different, are not accurate enough.
Without a commercial fishery, you got nothing as far as fishing goes. So it don't matter, like, even if you have a small tag, it's better to have a small tag than zero fishery. That would be my recommendation, 100%. Let the fishermen go out and fish as the fish should be. Let them use their knowledge to catch the fish, and then if they want to come and sample them, come and sample them. They're welcome to it.
And that would be at a time of the year when you feel that it would accurately reflect the stock?
Yes, definitely. Have it from the time the ice leaves for the spring herring till middle of June.
Okay, that's fine. 3 seconds, you said? Well, no. Thanks. No, thanks for providing the testimony here today and the photo evidence that you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrissey. And that's going to conclude our panel here. I just want to thank our witnesses for being here in person and for your testimonies. And as Mr. Morrissey said, if there is any more information, whether that's photos or written evidence that you'd like to provide to our committee, please do so to the clerk, and that'll be circulated amongst the members, and that'll help us, along with your testimony, to finalize the report and the recommendations that'll be flowing from it. So with that, our next meeting is going to be on Monday, March 23rd. We've got confirmation that Minister Thompson will be here along with DFO officials for the main estimates. But with that, meeting adjourned.